Perhaps Blair was being followed. Perhaps he only thought so. The hotel's security camera shows that in the space of an hour, he went in and out of the lobby 5 times before finally paying for a room. After checking in, Blair pocketed the key. But instead of going to his room, he marched out the front door and never came back. It was 7:37 p.m., and it was the last time Blair Adams was known to be alive.
That was obviously the voice of the late, great Robert Stack, host of the original version of Unsolved Mysteries. And today we're looking into a case that they covered way back in 1997, a case that happened in July of 1996. Happy Friday, everyone. It's me, John Lorden, here with another episode of BrainScratch for you. Really bizarre case that is still unsolved to this day. There's been a couple of news articles that have been released about it over the past year. There's been a bunch of YouTube videos that have been made about it, but we're going to try to put some of the newer information into play and see if we can make some sense out of what Blair Adams was doing, possibly where he went, and maybe even what happened to him. Now, this is a case that, due to its age, a lot of the major media sources have either weren't online yet, or the articles have expired and they're no longer available. So I'm basically stitching together the story through a series of retellings of it to start with. And then later in the video, there are what I consider, I guess, 3 different news sources that really dive into the details a bit sharper. So we're going to do kind of an overview of the story first and then get into the sharper detail towards the end. And then, of course, we'll also touch on some theories after that. So let's go ahead and start at historicmysteries.com. Blair Adams' story first aired on Unsolved Mysteries on April 18th, 1997. And down there we can see a picture of Blair. There's a few pictures that we'll see. This one looks like it might be quite a bit older. This kind of looks like it's probably from the late 80s. The mysterious death of the British Columbia resident seemed to make no sense at all. He had suddenly exhibited an acute case of paranoia and thought someone was trying to kill him. Authorities, who later investigated his death, believed that his fear did not stem from anything real. But then how and why did he end up murdered thousands of miles away? Adams was the foreman of a local construction company. He was always friendly and optimistic. The genial and cheerful outlook began to disappear and was slowly replaced with mood swings and anxiety. It started to affect his sleep, and he was getting less and less as the summer wore on. Blair's mother noticed the changes taking place with her son, and she asked him what was wrong. He told her, "I don't think I should tell you about it." So already we're seeing some interesting things here. From what I understand, nothing is actually clinically diagnosed, but there's enough people that are saying his pattern of behavior seemed to be changing. And we're going to get into some more details in those news articles a little bit later on this. But clearly, family and friends are concerned, and his strange behavior just continues to escalate. Continuing at the odysseyonline.com, his unusual behavior came to a tipping point on Friday, July 5th, 1996. That Friday, Blair rushed to the bank and emptied out his accounts and his safety deposit box, withdrawing over $6,000 in cash and thousands more in jewelry, gold, and other valuables. I've heard some minor fluctuations on the amount. Some other stories say it's more like $4,000 in cash and then several $1,000s in gold and other valuables. But you get the idea. This guy's basically pulling a large sum of money. And then on Sunday, Blair attempted to enter the United States, but was stopped at the border. The unusual amount of cash and valuables he had made border officials suspicious that he was a drug trafficker. After being turned away, Blair headed to the airport, where he purchased an airplane ticket to Frankfurt, Germany. Only hours after purchasing the ticket, Blair arrived unannounced and in a panic at a friend's house. There, Blair begged his friend to help him cross into the United States, saying he was terrified someone was after him and trying to kill him. His friend, however, was unable to help him. That Tuesday, the day his flight was scheduled to leave, Blair went to the airport, had his ticket refunded, and rented a car. He once again headed for the border, where this time he managed to get through and entered the U.S. After arriving in the U.S., Blair drove his car to Seattle and purchased a ticket for the first plane leaving the Seattle airport. This flight took Blair to Washington, D.C., where he arrived early on Wednesday morning and then rented another car and began to drive to Knoxville, Tennessee. Now, they word this very interestingly here. They're saying that he basically got to the U.S., went to the airport, and took the first flight that he could. I haven't found any information to really support that. I don't know if he intended specifically on trying to get to Washington, D.C. It doesn't seem like it if he's getting there and then having to rent a car and do a 7-hour drive to Knoxville, if that's really where he's trying to get to. Or is this guy just on the run? Is he just trying to shake up the trail because he's worried that someone's tracking him? I don't know, but that is certainly part of the mystery. What's going on with all this travel? His travel plans changing all over the place. There was also another occurrence at the border that we're going to talk about later today as well. Continuing at mysteriousuniverse.org, Adams arrived in Knoxville in the early morning hours of July 10th, 1996. He was seen at a gas station at around 5:30 a.m., where he wandered up to the clerk and rambled on about how the key to his rental car wouldn't work. A repair service driver by the name of Gerald Sapp made his way to the gas station and talked to the confused Adams. And here we have a quote from Gerald. I asked him to look in his pockets. I said, if you drove this thing up here, you got to have another key in your pockets. And he wouldn't look. So I thought he was nuts. He was bound and determined that he had the key he needed for that car. The guy was not all there. He didn't appear to be messed up. He didn't appear to be on drugs, but his mind wasn't functioning correctly for some reason. Now, I've heard a few different accounts. One is that he actually locked himself out of the car and that the key he had wasn't opening the car. Keep in mind, he has rented 2 cars on this last attempt for him to flee. He rented a Nissan that he used to cross the border. He then took a flight, and then he rented a Toyota after his flight. He had the Nissan key still with him. And that's the key that he showed to Gerald. And Gerald basically told him, hey, look, you're trying to open a Toyota with a Nissan. This isn't going to work. So where's the key? It's got to be on you. Now, one of the people that actually looked into this case, one of the law enforcement personnel on the episode of Unsolved Mysteries, specifically stated that he did actually go through his pockets and he couldn't find the key. So we have a slight discrepancy here between 2 people that actually interacted, well, at least one person that worked on this case and one person that interacted with him directly. The guy working on this case says he did check himself. He did not have the key. The key is going to become important a bit later. And then we have Gerald here saying, I told him he had the wrong key, but he refused to check himself. So let's go ahead and continue there. Sapp arranged to have the car towed and then drove Adams to the Fairfield Inn to stay for the night. Adams acted strange. That's where obviously the footage that we started this episode came from. He was walking in and out of the lobby 5 times within an hour before deciding that he was finally going to go ahead and book a room. He then books his room, but he apparently doesn't even go there, instead marching right back out the door without even looking at the room. The clerk at the time, Tika Hartsfield, would say, the best way to describe him would be paranoid. He was just very nervous, agitated, expecting someone to come in on him even though there wasn't anybody there. I don't know who he was looking for, but he was waiting for somebody to walk in for him. Very, very strange. So let's go ahead and continue. What happens? Well, we see the footage. He leaves at around 7:37, I believe. And then within 12 hours, his body is found. And for this announcement, we're going to knoxsheriff.org. This is the Knox County a cold case page where they've posted some information about the 1996 homicide of Robert Dennis Blair Adams. On July 11th, 1996, Robert Dennis Blair Adams was found dead at a motel under construction on Crosswood Boulevard near the Straw Plains Road exit of I-40 in Knox County. Now, that's not the same hotel where he was staying. This is a hotel that was, or a motel that was under construction at that time. And it's about based on the walking distance, I have a map that I've pulled on it that we'll get to later, but I've heard estimates that it's about half a mile away. The walking map that I pulled up actually looped it to more of almost a full mile, like 0.8 of a mile, because you have to go down to an area where you can kind of get under the highway to get over to that side. But the tow truck driver dropped him off at the Fairfield Inn motel to stay the night. The victim rented a room. It is believed that he never entered the room. The next morning, he was found dead. Robbery did not appear to be a motive because his money and other items of value were not missing. The victim knew no one in the area, and his reason to leave Canada or where he was headed was not known. Now, it gets even more interesting than that. I mean, keep in mind, this is a guy that in the footage, you might have noticed he has a bag, like a black duffel bag on him. He's also wearing a fanny pack, and that is where most of his valuables are. So, according to the county sheriffs here, they're finding everything that he supposedly had with him when they do find him the next day. Continuing at unsolved.com, Blair's body was found in a parking lot about a half mile from his hotel. He was naked from the waist down. Lieutenant Jones recalled his pants were removed in a way not like someone would take their own pants off, but in a way that someone else would remove your pants from you. His socks were turned inside out, his shoes were off, and his shirt was ripped open. Scattered around Blair's body was $4,000 in American, Canadian, and German currency. A small pack held another $2,000 worth of gold and jewelry. According to the autopsy report, Blair had sustained many cuts and abrasions. Police believed some of the wounds came from fending off an attack. Blair was ultimately killed by a violent blow that ruptured his stomach. Certainly sounds like a terrible thing to go through, and it's really interesting because all the information we're getting from people that have spoken to him before he goes missing would lead you to believe that this is a guy that is suffering from some type of delusional paranoia. However, we now have his body being found. He's clearly been attacked. He's also been stripped of his clothes. And initially, one of the thoughts I came to was, why would someone do that? Is someone trying to shame him for some reason? Is this potentially a murder related to a love issue of some kind where someone's trying to embarrass him? You know, I'm going to leave your body with your pants off. I'm really not sure, but that's just kind of some of the early thoughts that were rolling through my head when I started looking into this. Let's go ahead and continue with more information at WBIR.com. Finally, we're getting into some real news articles. There's only a few, unfortunately, on this. He was definitely struck in the head. Looks like he put his hands up and was struck in the hand. Then he went down and looks like road rash, like he was wrecked in a motorcycle, said KPD Chief Cold Case Investigator David Davenport. Pretty interesting explanation, in particular about the road rash. It's one thing to find defensive wounds on him, but how would that have happened? Obviously, he doesn't have his car, or he doesn't have the ability to use his car. Part of the reason why they had it towed to the hotel is because basically he was going to contact the rental company to get another key made the following day. They weren't open, I'm sure, at 7:30 at night. So how did he get into a vehicle to cause road rash is certainly a big question. Or was he even in the vehicle at all? Could there be something else that's going on here? We'll touch on that more. He just took off, didn't leave an explanation, didn't write a note, just left and ended up dead in Knoxville, Tennessee, Davenport said. And here we have another picture of him. This is a more recent, I believe this is a photo from his identification card. So a bit of a more recent photo here than the ones we were seeing earlier. Traveling was normal for Adams, who had spent time in Europe working construction jobs. People did describe him as acting strange. He had a girlfriend who said he was acting strange, Davenport said. Adams had been beaten with some type of metal bar and possibly stomped or run over. And I think that's an important consideration. Now, keep in mind, this is all coming from Davenport, but he is describing that it looks like road rash that is on one of his hands. So it's possible that he might have not been in the vehicle and then thrown out of the vehicle to cause that. It's possible that he could have been hit by a vehicle with enough force that it threw him against the pavement in a way where it looks like it made that road rash, possibly dragged along with the vehicle for a period of time or something along those lines. So Davenport is clearly considering there's something with the car that's going on here, and all the way to it could even be that a car is what ran over his stomach and ultimately killed him. Detectives also recovered his driver's license, passport, and credit card. They were strewn about 100 yards from his body, like they had been thrown from a vehicle as it was moving, Davenport explained. So I'm just getting a very clear sense. Davenport is all over, there's a vehicle involved here. They could have took something I don't know about. They could have took his pocket money thinking that was it, or got scared all of a sudden and took off. It was dark, so they couldn't see what they had anyhow, Davenport said. And that's one of the things that really kind of bothers me about this whole case is you have a man, if we do assume that he's going through delusions of some kind and that he's just done this trip to Knoxville just purely on the run, that he doesn't know anyone out there, he's not meeting up with anyone, we do have to consider the possibility that he bumped into someone and it was just a chance encounter, something weird happened. We know he was acting a bit strangely. Could that have aggravated someone to the point of them wanting to harm him? Something along those lines, quite possibly. But keep in mind that he's got money. He's literally got thousands of dollars that is on his person. He's got gold. He's got jewelry. The fact that none of that stuff was taken, and that's even that I'm not 100% comfortable in saying, because we know that there was stuff that was left behind. Could it be, like Davenport is suggesting, that there was something else on his person that they did take? Could it be that there was some other very expensive asset of some kind that they wound up stealing and we just don't know about it because this guy's already acting weird? How would we even know if all the contents of what he had taken out in terms of gold and jewelry were still there? I don't know if there's a catalog that they had from the safety deposit box of that stuff being in there. I would kind of doubt that there would be a catalog of that type of stuff, but I don't know. There's a lot that's going on, and it really bothers me that you have several $1,000s left behind, particularly with the chance encounter thing, unless this is just some kind of like possibly a road rage incident or something along those lines, where the motivation for it is just so far outside the realm of, oh, wow, I've just killed someone and there's all this money laying around and I'm not going to take the money. I'm not going to take all the jewelry. I don't know. There's a bit of a disconnect that's happening in this case for me. And it kind of points me in the other direction of thinking, is there something else to this? Was someone really following him? Did someone catch up to him? Because robbery is clearly, at least seemingly, not the motive here. If it was a robbery, it's kind of a botched robbery because they left behind thousands of dollars worth of stuff. I don't know. Just something to consider as we keep going through this. Tips have pointed to prostitutes and drug deals, but a toxicology report showed no drugs in his body. Either he met somebody or ran into somebody that caused his death. I don't know that it was a planned meeting or a chance meeting, Davenport said. We were able to recover a strand of hair off the body, and we've got some DNA evidence of that hair. Just no match, Davenport said. Now, keep in mind, we're at a much different period in time in terms of what we can do with DNA information now. I haven't seen anything about trying to do familial matches or trying to use the DNA to get the geography of where the person is from. I haven't even heard something as simple as what is the sex of the person. The description of the strand of hair that came off the body, I've seen it described as being a longer strand of hair. Not that that necessarily means it's ultimately a woman, but if they did extract DNA from it, they should at least be able to tell the sex relatively easily. That information has not been released. And I'm just curious that why is this thing sitting unsolved now for this long without any movement in terms of DNA processing? Also, has this person not been convicted of anything since? Because then this whole theory that this is a prostitute or a drug dealer or a pimp or something like that, that theory starts getting smaller and smaller in terms of probability for me if they've got a good DNA profile and it's not matching anyone that's being processed for those types of criminal activities. So let's go ahead and continue with the Toronto Sun. And now we're just going to start firing through a bit more detail about what's going on with this case. Adam's socks were on nearby asphalt. Keys and a hotel card were scattered around the crime scene. A black duffel bag contained maps and receipts. I believe that's probably the same duffel bag that we see in the video footage at the start of this video or in the Unsolved Mysteries episode. But there's something very important to note about, here's a picture of the key that's found. That is a Toyota key. The correct key for his car was found at the scene of his death. How the heck could that have happened? We'll touch on it when I give kind of an analysis of the map later. When his battered remains were discovered, one of his shoes was underneath his head like a pillow. And several descriptions I've read about that are, it seems like everyone's assuming that whatever happened to him happened to him. He then takes one of his shoes and pulls it near him and puts it under his head like a pillow while he's essentially dying. I don't know. There's something about that that doesn't feel right to me. When I imagine this scene and this guy that's going through all this, I mean, especially if you've had some type of blunt force trauma to your midsection that's so bad that it's ultimately killing you, are you really going to pull up the shoe and use it as a pillow? I don't know if it was just that's where the shoe happened to fall and that's where he happened to wind up. I don't know if it means that someone else, maybe even someone that harmed him, went up and spoke to him after the fact. Maybe they put the pillow under his head. Maybe there was someone else, a passerby, a witness, someone that saw something there. Maybe they stole a little something and that's why they haven't come forward. I don't know, but it's a very weird description to me that his shoe, just to imagine that this guy's dying on the ground and he pulls up his own shoe, tucks it under his head and uses it as a pillow. I'm not sure I buy it. And investigators believed Adams had been sexually assaulted, but there was no DNA. Now, hold on. This is a whole different twist. And unfortunately, that is all the detail that has been released publicly about the sexual assault. We don't know why they believe that. We don't know what type of assault this is. But the fact that there's no DNA left behind makes me wonder if this could have possibly been a sexual assault with an object of some kind. But in terms of motivation for this attack, we're now going into a whole different bucket. Now those theories that I had about chance encounter, road rage, Adams saying something weird, upsetting someone, this is a whole different area we're getting into now, to think that he was sexually assaulted. His pants were basically pulled inside out as they were pulled off his body. We know his socks were both inside out like they were pulled off his body. So what is going on with this case? And still, we have all this money, gold, jewelry found with his body. Here's an actual picture of his fanny pack, and you can see him. There's all kinds of gold items in here. There's literally small gold bars. There's pieces of platinum in there. I mean, just what is going on with this case? Now, with this sexual assault thing, it's once again really pushing me towards this is someone that knew him. This was something personal, and somehow they got to him, and maybe he wasn't lying. Maybe the anxiety came from the truth of him being worried that someone was actually coming to end his life or to attack him in some way. Obviously, both these things do happen. A lone security guard at another site heard a scream around 3:30 a.m. The rent-a-cop thought it sounded like a woman. Detectives followed a winding trail from Canada to Germany, where Adams had worked for his stepfather. Some called him sweet. Others claimed he was abrasive and confrontational and got into fistfights at local watering holes. So now as we're starting to crack into the details more, the simple version of the story where it's really easy to kind of sweeten these elements. Oh, he was a nice guy. He never did anything wrong. And all of a sudden he winds up dead. Now we're starting to get into a bit more reality about his personality type. So a bit of a confrontational past. I believe he even has assault charges previously. We're going to touch on that in another article as well. We hear a scream, or a rental cop hears a scream around 3:30 a.m. I'm curious why we haven't heard of an estimated time of death. That's literally the only thing that I've heard that might give us some indicator of when this attack happened. We don't have any information from the autopsy report, that at least that's been released publicly, where we can say, they think that he died between 10 p.m. and midnight. And then we would know that, okay, this scream at 3:30 doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And just the fact that they found him the next day, if they would have taken his body temperature, they would have been able to estimate within reason when he was killed. So I know they have that information. I don't know why it hasn't been publicly disclosed. And then we get a very interesting twist here. 2 women told detectives they saw Adams talking to a man at Cracker Barrel. He has not been identified. And then they have a composite drawing here. Now, according to another publication, which we're going to get to next, the Knox News here, they have the same photo here, but they're saying that this photo is actually a composite sketch of Blair Adams. I don't really know that I believe this, but it's interesting because this article has a lot of really, really good detail. I know the reporter worked really hard on this article. I don't know why we have this kind of discrepancy. I bumped into another discrepancy with one of the other articles where they got the hotel wrong that his body was found at. That kind of stuff happens. This is a major one. First of all, why would you have a composite sketch created of a known victim? Doesn't really make sense to me unless you're doing it specifically just for media. Like if they didn't want to talk about his identity and they were going to run it on the nightly news and they had someone whip up a composite sketch for that particular segment. That's not what we're hearing here. According to the Toronto Sun, this composite sketch is actually who 2 women told detectives they saw Adams talking to at Cracker Barrel. So I think we have all the main sites figured out now. Let's go ahead and jump to the map real quick so I can tell you guys what I think is going on here. So we have down here is the Fairfield Inn and Suites, and this is where he was staying. This is Strawberry Plains, which has been mentioned several times in these stories. And right off of Strawberry Plains, there is a BP gas that is, I believe, the gas station where he ran into Gerald. So if we take a look at this, and I didn't draw this walking path, I just put in the points. We start at Fairfield Inn. Here is Cracker Barrel. So if he did actually wind up going to Cracker Barrel, it would kind of make sense. It's a pretty short walk. It's, I think, probably the closest restaurant, or at least it's in a strip of the closest restaurants to where he's staying. We know that he checked in around 7:30 p.m. If he hadn't eaten up to that point, he was probably hungry and wanted dinner. So him not getting to his room, not checking into his room, especially if he's carrying all those valuables, doesn't want to leave those in the room, might make sense that he checks in but then says, you know what, I'm going to go back to that restaurant that I saw back down the road. So Cracker Barrel sighting by the 2 women, I'm not sure that I should write that off, although we do have one of the investigators that ultimately winds up writing that off. I'm wondering if he was thinking about his missing key and decided that he wanted to go back to BP to look for it, or possibly remembered where he left it, if he left it on the counter there, or if he left it in the bathroom. I'm really curious why that information wouldn't have come forward, but I don't know how this investigation went. I don't know if they spoke to the people that he interacted with at BP. He could have bumped into someone later that evening. Did police talk to that person? Did they potentially miss that person? Was there footage from the BP where they might have seen him coming back later in the evening to get his key? I really have a lot of questions about all that, because if you just look at the walking path of, and I didn't put BP in as a point for him to walk to, I just put in, if he was walking, how would he get from where he started at the Fairfield Inn to where his body wound up, which ultimately turned out to be a Red Roof Inn down here. And this is the walking path that Google came up with, of course, with the stop at the Cracker Barrel. So that's kind of what I'm wondering, because we know that when his body is found in the parking lot of the under construction Red Roof Inn, he has the correct key. So it might explain that the first investigator might have been correct. Maybe he did check his pants and told Gerald, no, I don't have that key. And then later that evening, he goes back to the BP, figures out that he left it there, gets the key back. I don't know what happens from here. Yeah, I think he comes back to BP. Something happens at this gas station that moves him from that point to what's under construction. And if you look through here, there's not a whole lot of other businesses out here. There's not a whole lot to be seen. I mean, if you are going to possibly do something illegal, if you are maybe looking to do a drug deal or something like that, going to a construction site that's at the edge of a area that is all just, basically good coverage, probably not the worst place to do it if you're worried about being found by authorities. So I don't know. It's like I talk myself out of it on one side and then I talk myself back into it on another. How did he get to this area? Sure seems to me like BP is a part of that. And I don't know why we haven't heard information about that released publicly. And then, of course, the case goes cold. Cops theorize Adams was the victim of a sexual interaction that went awry. A truck stop with sex workers was nearby. Once again, if it was that type of situation, why are they going to leave $4,000 and several $1,000s in jewelry and gold behind? If that's the element that we think really ended his life, they did something that is really incongruent for that type of element. It's just they would take the money. I don't see them leaving the money, not one bit. The operating theory has been that the killer was a pimp, a prostitute, or both. Maybe he got rolled, or maybe it was a female prostitute. Maybe she had a pimp that was close by and they were going to roll this guy and they got scared and didn't, Davenport said. I don't know if I agree with Davenport on this. I don't think he's looking at the right type of person for doing this type of assault. And why is a pimp or a prostitute going to sexually assault this guy? The information that came out says they think that he was sexually assaulted, not that they think he was sexually active at the time that he died. If we had more details about what type of assault that was, maybe that would help us understand things a little better. But I'm having trouble thinking that just some random pimp and prostitute decided, hey, this guy messed with us so bad that we're going to sexually assault him and, leave his body with his pants off in the middle of a parking lot for an under construction motel. It just, it seems too personal. At least from what I'm seeing, it seems way too personal for that to be what's happening here. And finally, I've honestly been saving what I consider the best article for last at knoxnews.com. And I just want to give a quick shout out to the author on this who did a really good job. He also started a Reddit thread where he's been responding to some people's thoughts and concerns, and he gives more insight. His name is Travis Dorman. And, he reached back out to Blair's mother, got more information, another interview with her. We're going to get some of those details as well. But another thing is we get some more information about Blair and who he was, what type of element maybe he would have been mixing with. 2 years sober, he stopped attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. The 31-year-old Canadian construction foreman began leaving the job site unlocked, then quit without picking up his paycheck, saying he didn't know if he could carry on here. His coworkers suggested he see a doctor. He told his mother people were spreading rumors about him. He told friends he feared someone was going to kill him. And here we have another shot of the fanny pack. And I'm wondering if this is how it was found. I'd be very surprised if this wasn't how it was found. It looks like the top is open to me there. I know this is obviously someone's processing it. You can see they're wearing gloves and they're opening it to see what's inside. But you can see there's like a white inner liner to that fanny pack, and I'm pretty sure you're seeing it here. So I think this thing was open when they found it. Authorities tested pieces of rebar from the construction site, but failed to locate the murder weapon. Although Adams had grappled with addiction in the past, toxicology reports showed no drugs or alcohol in his system. He had not officially been diagnosed with any kind of mental illness. In a recent phone conversation, Edwards, that's his mother, described her son as kind and ambitious and said she didn't believe he suffered from mental illness in the weeks before his death. She said Adams had once been romantically involved with a male roommate. Just because we're now talking about a situation where they're saying he was sexually assaulted, now knowing that he it seems like he was bisexual. We know that he had a girlfriend at the time that he died as well. Could that be a motivating factor in what happened to him? Is there potentially a burnt lover from the past or some type of love triangle that has happened in this case? I don't know, but it's been mentioned in a couple of different articles from his mother that at one point he was romantically involved with a man. Quote, "They acted a little strangely and giggled a lot, and it was kind of odd, but then he went back to a heterosexual relationship after that," she said. She claimed Adams traveled to the South to attend the 1996 Summer Olympic Games in Atlanta. Information never relayed to authorities. Now, that's a bit of an interesting twist. I don't know that we're really seeing anything to suggest that that's true. You know, we have him trying to cross the border a bunch of times. He flies to DC for some reason. Then he's driving to Tennessee. I mean, yeah, I guess he could be heading to Georgia, but it's not like this guy's on vacation and he's trying to take in some sights along the way, at least not from the interactions that we're hearing. So I don't know that this information is all that solid, but it is what his mother is saying. And then, of course, she never passed that on to the authorities that are investigating the case. The games began July 19th, 8 days after Adams's body was discovered more than 200 miles away in Knox County. Edwards didn't explain how she knew her son's destination, how he ended up in Knoxville, or why she never told police. Another thing would be, was there tickets anywhere? Did he have tickets for the Olympics, or was he just hoping to buy some off a scalper when he got there? I don't know that I buy the Olympics thing either. That was the whole point of his trip, Edwards said, before hanging up the phone. And I know that sounds kind of weird and abrupt. If you read the Reddit thread where the author of this piece talks more about it, he says, she literally hung up on him. He tried calling back. Other calls to Edwards' home were answered by her husband, who grew angry, called chances of solving the case remote as hell, and said, "We're not going to open that can of worms again." Adams worked in late 1995 for his stepfather's prefab construction company, SS Cedar Homes, on an assisted living facility near Frankfurt, Germany. He met a woman there while attending a party in November, and the two began dating. She told detectives that Adams was a gentleman, whereas some, including a man he worked with in Germany, portrayed him as an abrasive and confrontational character who occasionally got in fights. Although Adams told several people he feared for his life, he specified to his German girlfriend and at least one other friend that he dreaded violence from former co-workers who had recently returned from Germany. Now, it's interesting because we also have him looking at taking a flight to Germany before he crosses the border into the U.S. Was he thinking that because they were coming from Germany, that maybe he'd be safer out there? Or was he going to go try to hide out with his girlfriend, something along those lines? 3 days before his death at a travel service, a subdued Adams shelled out nearly $1,700 in Canadian cash for a round-trip flight to Frankfurt. He requested a refund the same day, explaining that the person he was going to visit had gotten sick. His German girlfriend says she wasn't expecting him. So was he just trying to avoid the person that was coming back from Germany? Was he trying to head out there to speak to this person, to head off this violence he was worried about? I don't know. Especially if, well, it's weird. He's making a flight the same day and then he's renting a car and trying to cross the border. Maybe he's flip-flopping even within himself about what he can do to try to get this pressure dealt with that he's been dealing with all this time. So now we get into another time he tried to cross the border, which not a whole lot of the retellings of this story actually cover. Before dawn on July 9th, Adams was spotted wandering near the border. Then he attempted to cross on foot. Authorities at the Pacific Highway border crossing noted he had small scratches on his hands and legs. He matched the description of an auto theft suspect, and a blue car stolen in Vancouver had just been found near the point where he tried to cross. Adams appeared dazed, but proclaimed his innocence. Police had no evidence to tie him to the stolen car, so they released him back into Canada. A friend later told authorities she saw Adams driving a blue car, not his usual Chevette the day before. So it seems like, just going off this information, this other attempt for him to cross the border was thwarted when they thought he possibly stole a car. And we've got a friend of his confirming, yeah, he was driving a car that wasn't his. The color matches. The car is found close to where he's crossing the border. A lot of strangeness going on there. Then, of course, we know he rents the Nissan Altima. He does get across the border, ditches the Altima at the Seattle airport, and then purchased an overnight one-way flight to Washington, D.C. for nearly $800 when he could have bought a round trip for half the price. Just another bizarre twist to this. Even if you're not going to use the round trip, why not do it just to save a couple $100, especially if you're on the run, even with 6 to 8 or 10, even if we think it's $15,000. How long are you going to be able to run on that money? You can't just go blowing it willy-nilly. But for some reason, he specifically wants a one-way ticket for $800. I don't know, just another strange twist in this. And then takes a 7-hour drive to Knoxville. There's also another occurrence on his way there in Troy, Virginia. Adams backs his car into another man's vehicle, causing minor damage. The man told detectives that Adams seemed nice, but was in a hurry. Then we get a little more information about Interstate Repair Service driver Gerald Sapp. Police called Sapp the next morning and informed him of Adams's death, then brought him in for questioning and took hair samples. The ordeal led Sapp, then in his 40s, to leave his job. Police didn't accuse me, but I felt like I was under suspicion for killing somebody, and that wasn't anywhere I needed to be, he said. Now, of course, they're going to consider him. I mean, he's someone that we know interacted with Blair and knew where Blair was staying because, he arranged for Blair's car to be towed to that Fairfield Inn. So I think I understand why police have to rule him out. Quite honestly, it feels a little bit like overkill to me that Gerald then literally quits his job. I'm not really sure how one thing there ties to the other, but seems like from his point of view, that makes sense. Obviously, if they do have a good DNA sample and they got a sample from Gerald, there was no match. So I don't think that Gerald is still in any consideration for this. And then, of course, we have Blair renting his room, but he does it with a $100 bill, then walks away without getting his change. The clerk repeatedly tried to call his room, but he wasn't there. So the information that he never even went to his room gets a little more solid when you know that aspect of the story as well. I mean, she's essentially trying to get him his change, calling him in the room time and time again. He's not answering that. So I think the info that he never got to his room is probably pretty good. Perry Moyers, then a KCSO detective who worked the case, ruled out 2 reported sightings of Adams after he left the hotel that night. 3 employees at the T&R truck stop on Deep Springs Road in Dandridge claim they saw Adams there between 9:30 to 10:30, flipping through tattoo magazines and talking to an unidentified man about Canadian money. So I did check a map on Dandridge, and that's about 20 miles away from where he was staying. So if he did not have his vehicle working at the time, if he didn't know where the key was, I don't think that he would have wound up out there. But we know that he winds up with the key. I assume his car is still at the parking lot of the Fairfield Inn, but I am assuming that. I think they would have noted if, his car wound up at the parking lot where he was or somewhere else, and I haven't found any information to say that. So I think we have to consider that he was probably on foot. That doesn't mean that he couldn't have met someone that possibly took him to that truck stop. If he was looking for drugs or prostitution or something along those lines. But once again, with the mindset this guy's in, I don't see him going that way. Then we have the Cracker Barrel sighting. 2 women at the Cracker Barrel on Strawberry Plains Pike told detectives they saw Adams with another man who was never identified. Their stories differed on what that man looked like, which once again makes me wonder about that composite sketch. Is that composite sketch just based on one of their descriptions and then the other woman's description didn't match that? Or is that composite sketch not this man at all, but actually for some reason a composite of Blair, which I really have trouble believing? I don't know. But them potentially spotting him at Strawberry Plains Pike, that close to where we know he had rented his room, I don't know how they could necessarily rule out that sighting. Even if you have their stories differing on what the man that he was with looked like, so what? If they can identify that, no, that's the guy that we know Blair was there, we're just not sure what the guy looked like that was with him. I don't think that's enough to rule out that sighting. So I don't know why Perry Moyers decides to rule that out, but according to this article, that's precisely what happened. Authorities believe Adams, who at that point had no car, ate somewhere after he left the hotel because he was found dead with lettuce, meat, and shrimp still in his stomach. Once again, that information is supporting that he probably did go to a restaurant. So shouldn't we put a little more into that potential sighting at Cracker Barrel? Just based off what I'm seeing here, I would. If Adams's journey was motivated by a planned drug deal or a romantic rendezvous, his friends, relatives, coworkers, and girlfriends appeared unaware. None of them believed him to be involved in drug dealing, and no calls to the U.S. had been made from his home. Several of the suspects considered over the years were pimps or prostitutes known to work in the area. Now, there's one thing, I thought I had it highlighted here, but that is worth noting. He does have a past. He has convictions for narcotics and assaults, at least according to one of these articles somewhere. So the thought that he could have been looking to score, it's possible. I just don't know that he would be doing that if he was really terrified of someone, chasing him all over the world, like we're talking about in this case. Davenport believes the sex act could have been committed in a vehicle. When the struggle began, the killer might have hit Adams in the head, thrown him onto the road, and struck him while driving away. I'm really struggling. And I know, we're talking about a guy that does this for his career. But if you're talking about something where you're looking at pieces of rebar and you're thinking that it's a pipe or a piece of metal of some kind that, hit him in the head, significant enough to damage him, I don't know how you do it in a car. Is it possible? I guess. But is it really reasonable to think that that's the most likely scenario? I don't know. I think it'd be pretty hard to get enough backswing on something to try to really damage someone with a pipe of some kind, hitting someone else in the head. And that's even if it's a pretty roomy, like a four-door. I'm even imagining like one of those big old 70s sedans. There's just not a whole lot of room for swinging around something like that. But Davenport is clearly stuck on this theory that it involves a car. I just don't know that Adams was in the car. That's really where I'm getting stuck. The fatal blow to the stomach could have been caused by the vehicle's front bumper, Davenport believes. That's a little bit of a change from what he stated earlier, where he made it sound like he could have been run over. Jones, who is the Knox County sheriff, disagrees. And there's a picture of him right below it. Jones thinks that the blow was actually from a kick. Davenport's theory would explain Adams's blackened hand. He caught the pavement, Davenport said. If you've ever wrecked a motorcycle, how the rocks or pavement will eat you up. One of his hands looked like that. Once again, I think that same damage could happen if he was hit by a car, if the car was going fast enough and knocked him. After 21 years, some people who might have known about Adams's killing are likely dead or in jail. And with scarce physical evidence, cracking the mystery will take somebody telling us about it, Davenport said. I don't know that the suspect would be in jail, because I think most people that are in jail, especially if they've been convicted of a crime, I would like to think that their DNA has been profiled and added to the system associated with their crime. So I did a little more digging on that specific aspect, and I found this article at forensicmag.com. 7 states have thousands of inmates not in DNA databases. And this article goes into a couple of different aspects. If when the person was incarcerated predates when DNA collection was happening, obviously they're not going to be in there. Some inmates refuse to give their DNA. But for the 7 states that they're talking about in this article, we do actually see Tennessee listed in there. So what Davenport is saying is correct. They potentially could have the culprit literally sitting in jail, and they don't know because they haven't collected their DNA and added it to the CODIS database. This article was written on July 17th, 2017. I'm hoping that we see some changes in that really soon, because we've got the majority of the United States following this process of cataloging DNA for inmates, but unfortunately a small handful of states aren't doing that. And if you're curious about the other states, they are Nevada, Nebraska, Montana, Georgia, Rhode Island, and Delaware. Any lead, however big or small, can be relevant, said Cold Case Unit investigator Debbie White. And that's really what we're looking for here, is more leads on this really bizarre case. There's just so much going on to this, and I'm really struggling with trying to figure out the motivation for who did this. It doesn't feel like it's just a chance encounter to me. You've got something very bizarre with the sexual assault, and we don't know enough details to know what type of assault that is, but between that and the money being left behind, it seems to me like this is an attack of a very personal nature. And I don't imagine that any prostitute or pimp is going to leave $4,000 to $6,000 laying on the ground there. I don't believe it. Now, if we do consider the possibility that people were in a vehicle when he was hit and they didn't get out of the vehicle, that's potentially possible. But Davenport said that it seemed like his ID and his stuff had been thrown out, that it was found, 100 yards away from where he was. So it would seem like someone, well, once again, Davenport's assuming that they were in a vehicle. All we can say was that there was that distance and the stuff was scattered about. That could mean that someone picked that stuff up, was walking away and just throwing it as they were walking away. That doesn't ultimately necessarily mean that there's a vehicle, but we know Davenport is very, very focused on the vehicle in this case. Yeah, just so much going on with this. I'm actually going to send this video to Travis Dorman as well, just because he's been so open about responding to people's thoughts on this. And Travis, if you have information that can help us understand this a bit better that you can share with us, please do, and I can do an update video on this case as well. And thank you for really pulling together such a really good I don't want to say version of this story, but that's exactly what I feel like, because I've been reading all these different retellings of this story. This is the first one where we're really getting a lot of very fine detail that's helping us understand things quite a bit better. And this article only came out this year. So this is information that is actually, it just came out September of 2017. So it's been a little over a year. But there's just really compelling information here. And I feel like there are the pieces in place to solve this. And I think we obviously have someone that knows what happened, that has gotten away with it. Is there anyone around that person? Was it more than one person that witnessed this? Is there someone that heard someone talk about it at some point? If you have information about this case, please do the right thing. Use the contact information that I put in the description box below. You can make it as simple as an email. If you want to go anonymous, start up some random Gmail account and just send an email with the information to the email address I have down below. This feels like one of those cases that is just right on the brink. Like there's just one little small piece of information that needs to come in that can make this thing pull through, or one process that needs to run, like, hey, detectives, send that DNA to Parabon, pay the $2,500 or whatever it is, get some genealogy going. Let's figure this thing out. This case looks really, really solvable, even from the limited number of articles that we reviewed on it today. Before we get to the next part of the episode, I want to give you all a quick reminder. I am off next week. Going to be off. No videos next week. I'm unplugging, no Twitter, everything off for a week, but back the following week, and I will be doing a special Itchy Mysteries episode. It's been a long time since we've seen an Itchy Mysteries, and we are doing it about Making a Murderer Part 2. Do I love it? Do I hate it? Is it as good as the first one? We might also do a spoiler discussion video on that as well. So check that out when we come back after next week. Before we get to the comments from last week's episode, I have to thank several new patrons, starting with Danielle S., John Weber, Laura Rodriguez, Rapid, Randy Hughes, and Sharon. Thank each and every one of you for supporting me on Patreon. I truly appreciate it. If you want to do the same, head over to lordenarts.com and check out the link in the upper right. You can either support on Patreon or PayPal, or buy some merch, or buy the audiobook. There's all kinds of stuff there that basically helps keep me funded and keep me doing what I'm trying to do here, which is helping other people. So now we're going to go through some of your comments about BrainScratch from last week. That is the Halloween episode about Joel Loveleen and that party bus. And then that other guy dressed up like a lion, Travis Stay. Really, really bizarre case. And just in case you missed the video I released on Monday this week, the lawyer for Travis Stay was at an event that I went to this past weekend. So did I learn anything? If you missed that video, you might want to check it out. It is called Lorden Arts Inside the Staircase. But let's start with a comment from Crystal Barnes. Saying I'm not a violent person goes out the window when you're 3 sheets to the wind. Everyone has that one family member that is as gentle as can be until they drink. I wonder what kind of booze they were drinking. My brother-in-law can drink a few beers just fine, but when he taps the whiskey, he gets violent. Yeah, I think I'm with you, Crystal. I'm really, I don't feel so solid about Travis's statement about that as well. According to his information, he has 10 drinks, but he also says that he's blackout drunk. So how does he know that he stopped at 10? We have 2 occurrences where it seems like he attacks other people. Even if he's not very good at doing it, he is trying to attack other people. So I'm kind of with you. Just because you think you know yourself all that well, when you get to the point of being blackout drunk, I don't know that you can really rely on how you usually are. I think that other things can happen around that. Gary Lee also kind of comments on this. There does not need to be a motive when blackout alcohol-fueled rage is at play. I myself am a person that absolutely cannot drink because I can honestly say the night may not end well. And I have known many, many raging alcoholics, especially if hard liquor is involved. I would hope all of these, quote, clowns have grown up some. I like what you did there, Gary. And taken an honest look at how they have a good time. Also, one sucker punch, as cowardly as it is, can bring down the biggest of men. There was some other information I ran into about the coroner's analysis. I don't remember if I covered it in the episode, but the coroner said that he could have essentially been kicked in the testicles as well. So it could be that someone attacked him there. That's what brought him down and then devastated him after that with an object. Someone was asking in the comments, could it possibly have been a shoe? I think the problem with the way the coroner was describing the damage was it seems like it was by an object that didn't have rigid edges to it. Quite honestly, I thought after I released the episode, I was thinking about the costumes. And I was wondering, like, if I was going to attack someone and if I was dressed up like one of the costumes I've heard about in this story, what would the item, what item would I use from one of these costumes to attack someone that would protect me enough that I wouldn't get hurt? And the number one thing that pops into my head is we have one of those 3 guys dressed up as a construction worker. And if he's dressed up as a construction worker, I'm betting he had a helmet and, you know, pretty round surface. Doesn't necessarily show the flat edges. That's just kind of where my mind went with it. Amp888. I can absolutely believe that a sporting rivalry would be enough to start violence between people, especially when alcohol is involved. Where I live, in Scotland, many pubs don't allow anyone to enter if they're wearing football, soccer, clothing, because of the potential for violent confrontations. It's not uncommon for there to be around 200 violent crimes reported to police per year between fans of 2 football or soccer teams based in Glasgow, Celtic and Rangers. There's also a history of football, soccer, hooliganism in the UK dating back decades. Neural Mute responds to that. Here in Canada, we take our hockey pretty seriously as well. When I was a teen in a fairly rural area, kids from our town just didn't go near a town a few kilometers away because the hockey rivalry was known to be so violent. Every game would end with a fight in the stands no matter what happened on the ice. I'm pretty concerned about that aspect as well. I think that there's a very strong possibility that that conversation went sideways based specifically on the teams. We already have these guys all charged up. They're drinking. There's all this stuff that's going on already. There's been a fight. Yeah, I think that we already have testosterone levels popping through the roof, and then you mix in a rivalry like that. I think it just leads to bad things. Ricky Rubio, the key has to be the blood evidence. None of Travis Stay's blood was on Joel. My personal take on this is that the other party goers got off the bus to confront Travis. Then what if Joel stepped in on Travis's behalf and they beat him to death while Travis stood there? That would explain Joel's blood spatter being on Travis. I think those other party goers were responsible. Really interesting thought, Ricky. And then we have kind of the flip side on that, brought by Sarah Beth Calagros. But they would have beat Joel while Travis stood idly by. We know he was aggressive that night, unprovoked with other people later in the night, but he would just stand there watching a fight, and the attackers who had beef with him would leave him be. Those two comments point exactly why I am just split 50-50 on this. It bothers me that Joel's blood is all over Travis, but then it also bothers me that Travis's blood isn't on Joel when we know he's bleeding and he supposedly attacked Joel in that theory. And then, yeah, on the flip side of that, these guys are attacking Joel, who is there possibly defending Travis, and then Travis just kind of stands there and doesn't do anything, takes off, doesn't call for help. This is the sticky point of this conversation, and it's part of the reason why I think we don't really know what the truth is, because both of these sides are somewhat reasonable in the context of what we're talking about here. And one of these stories isn't really poking out as seeming more authentic than the other. Both of these situations are pretty well suited to the limited information and evidence that we have in this case. So really, really tough one. Hope everyone out there had a wonderful, safe, and fun Halloween. I know I hit all three of those points. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you back here on the Lord and Arch channel on Monday, November 12th. See you there.